My colleague Craig Melvin wrapped up his exclusive interview with the President of the United States. Craig, we are seeing you now joining us from the North Lawn of the White House. That is why you are not in your usual seat anchoring this hour here on MSNBC Reports. Let's get to it. Talk about the news out of this. Take us through the conversation.
I appreciate you holding it down, by the way. It was a wide-ranging, roughly 30-minute conversation, the bulk of which, Hallie, was spent talking about President Biden's $6 trillion spending plans. How he plans to pay for it, Republican opposition to it. We also spent some time talking about the president's view of the role of government, if you will. The president in that speech last night, a lot of folks heard the president's speech and basically heard something we hadn't really heard in generations. The era of big government is back. President Biden made the case to me again this morning that government is capable of doing big things, and that we should start expecting more from government. We also talked about the Republican response to his address last night. Of course, that coming from the junior senator from South Carolina, Tim Scott, who at one point during that response said America is not racist. I asked the president about that. And we also talked about immigration. Of course, you could make the argument that his first 100 days have essentially been defined by the response to the pandemic and the response or lack thereof, according to some, to the situation at the southern border. We talked about that. We talked about whether he considers what's happening there a crisis. I asked him about those hundreds of migrant children that he promised to reunite with their families. I asked him about that pledge. And he also spent some time talking about Rudy Giuliani. Of course, it was reported yesterday evening that President Trump's one-time lawyer, his office, his home had been raided by federal investigators. Here's President Biden's response to that question. Federal investigators searched the home and the office of Rudy Giuliani as part of an investigation into his time as President Trump's attorney, his dealings with Ukraine. Were you aware of that raid before it happened?
I give him my word I was not. I made a pledge. I would not interfere in any way, order, or try to stop any investigation the Justice Department had underway. I learned about that last night when the rest of the world learned about it. My word. I had no idea this was underway.
Have you been briefed on any other investigations involving?
And I'm not asking to be briefed. I'm not asking to be briefed. That's the Justice Department's independent judgment. This last administration politicized the Justice Department so badly. So many of them quit. So many left because that's not the role. It's not the role of a president to say who should be prosecuted, when they should be prosecuted, who should be not prosecuted. That's not the role of the president. The Justice Department is the people's lawyer, not the president's lawyer.
President Biden insisting there that he was not aware of the raid on Rudy Giuliani's office or his home yesterday, also saying he had not been briefed on any other investigations involving former President Trump or any of his allies. Hallie, as you know, right after our conversation, President Biden and Dr. Biden headed to Joint Base Andrews. They're going down to Georgia for that rally tonight. But before that, they're going to spend some time with President Carter, 96 years old, there in Plains, Georgia. He has been sick for some time. A live look here at Joint Base Andrews. I continue, by the way, to be amazed at the speed by which the President of the United States can get from the White House to Joint Base Andrews. It had to take less than 10 minutes. But
it's
I digress.
Like 11.
It really is quite remarkable.
A fair amount of time on that South Lawn, waiting for that in the winter, waiting for that chopper to arrive. It's about 10 and a half minutes.
We talked about his old friend, President Carter, of course, as you know. President Biden, the first senator to endorse him back in 1976 when he was 33 years old. He spent some time talking about his dear friend. Oh, and by the way, and I think this will probably be what most folks care about, Major the dog, an update on Major and also some other breaking news regarding perhaps an additional pet being adopted by the first family.
Are you going to share that news with us now, Craig, after that tease?
No, I think that's probably all I can give you.
All right. Can I ask you a follow-up question, Craig? I don't know if you can answer this one, but as we're talking, especially as we've talked so much today, and you referenced it, right, this idea that President Biden, White House officials, they want to go big. The era of big government. That was very clearly laid out in the president's speech to the nation. Did he at all address the concerns that have been coming up, even from some in his own party, that perhaps he runs the risk of trying to go too big and tipping the balance there?
He did address it. He addressed it and essentially dismissed those concerns. The president, as you've noted here, is making a political calculation. And part of that calculation is related to the pandemic. He thinks that he has been emboldened to a certain extent because of the pandemic and the government's response to it. He thinks that there is an appetite in this country for more government, for bigger government, for bolder government. He thinks there's an appetite for it. And he also spent a fair amount of time talking about the Trump-era tax cuts, as he called them, and pointing out that a number of folks who are crying foul now about government spending were not crying foul just a few years ago, as we look at the president here. Yeah. And Dr. Joe Biden joined us for a portion of the interview as well, and revealed that yesterday was especially long for her because in addition to having to attend the joint address to Congress, she also taught. As you know, she's a community college professor. She taught a course yesterday. She had to grade papers, and then she had to go and spend some time last night as well. So we spent some time talking about her responsibilities. And I also asked her, I read years ago that the presidency doesn't really change a person. It merely reveals who they've always been. And she addressed that. She talked about what the first 100 days had revealed to her about her husband as we watched the first couple there on the tarmac at Joint Base Andrews.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.